Hello, hello, and welcome to Connect In. I'm Damini Celebrate and the author of Painting the Landscape of Your Soul. And it is my mission to help you live as your brightest best self. Connect In is a weekly broadcast that helps us get out of our heads so we can be back in our body because our body holds the roadmap for our transformation. And our body does that by giving us signs and signals, which is often feelings, emotions, sensations in the body. But, we're all just so busy. And when we are busy like this, we are up here. We are not feeling really what's going on. And if we are, it takes a lot longer, if we're kind of in the head and in the body. And you know this, like sometimes people will come up with horrible illnesses, and they're like, how could they have not known? Well, that's because we're all mostly living up here. Okay, the truth is, we are all living up in our head. And so when you connect into your body, into your heart, you can kind of connect into your inner guidance. And honestly, life has more flow. That shows up like you can sleep better because you're not up all night thinking about what am I doing wrong? I can't, whatever those stories are. And so in today's Connect In, we're going to talk about fear. Yeah, it's Halloween. I got my Halloween hat on. It's that time of year where we get to honor our fear. We get to face our fear. We get to be our fear. Now, as kids, we do that pretty easily, right? As adults, we let the kids do it, um, or we kind of watch it from the side, or we just totally ignore it all, and it's just some silly holiday. But this time between the 31st, 1st, and 2nd of November, um, is a time where they say the veils are thin. And so, hence, we can kind of feel into other realms around us. We can feel into our ancestors, if that's part of your belief system. Um, but I also feel like it's an opportunity to feel into the many layers of us. And so let's talk about fear. As young adults, we loved, most of us, loved to be stimulated by horror movies, by scary things. Like it was like this permission to step beyond the veil of our good being, of being good, of being this perfect little child or this perfect adult, and to really step into this place that we as a culture, at least in the States, don't allow ourselves to drop into. So, if we go on about the thought of our body is the roadmap, excuse me, excuse me. If we think about our body as the roadmap for our transformation, fear is a big player because fear is what stops us. It stops us when we are at a precipice of change. Yeah, we all know this. It's like, I have this great dream, I have this idea, I'm going to take all these steps, and it's like, whatever stops you from moving forward. Right? So before the head gets involved in that stop, what happens to your body? And I think this is important that to take the moment and really just honor what is going on in your body. So think about it. When you get afraid, right? It's like bring yourself back, time warp, woo, back to those scary movies. Either the big epic scary movies or the other movies that just show up on TV and most people think are okay, but they're actually horror movies, right? So take your best self back to thinking. Like there's a moment where you're kind of hanging out and then the music starts. So what happens to your body at that first moment of fear? Chances are you begin to slow your breath, contract your body, still, right? And as the suspense, as the fear builds, it's almost that you begin to contract, right? You begin to crawl up in a little ball until whatever happens, happens. And then we go, wah! And then we drop into flight. So fight and flight um, is a very common experience in fear. But today's talk today's episode is really about exploring the signs and signals of when fear holds you back. Right? So take a moment and really just think about what happens in your body. What happens in your body when you are moving into a fear? Right? For all of you, it could be slightly different, but I think it's really worth exploring. So, why does fear show up? A minute ago, I talked about fear being the precipice of change, right? It's like fear patterns, for the most part, are set up when we are really young, right? Don't touch that, that's hot. It's a good learning lesson, right? But don't do that. What are other ones? Children should be seen and not heard, right? That can set up a fear pattern where you don't speak up for yourself. There's a lot of different ways, and there's a lot of different ways as children that we were kind of put boundaries around ourselves and our lives. But those, unfortunately, unless we kind of work through those, recognize them, give them some creed or not, like to kind of shine a light on them and say, damn, you're just a shiny old dust ball. I like to use this example about fear. Like, when you're a kid, there was something under your bed, right? And, I don't know about you, but I grew up in the time of the blob. So my poor parents had to every night for a really long time check under my bed and cover up all my heating ducts because I was afraid something was going to get in, right? And no matter how many times as a child they would get this big old flashlight and go, that's a tennis ball under your bed, and that's just all good old dust bunny, and there's nothing down these heating ducts. Like, I wouldn't have any of it. It was just like, even though the light got shined on it, I was in such a state of fight or flight, I couldn't process it. But as adults, sometimes these childhood fear patterns get submerged, right? And they just don't show up in your day-to-day consciousness life, but they show up like little triggers when you're about to do something that kind of steps you beyond your norm. And a good example of that is when you want to change your job, change your relationship, change where you live. You're like, they're big moves. And so there you can go, oh, I really, really, really want to, but in your head, right? You can't do this, you won't have any friends, you don't, there's this whole list of why you can't do something. And in fact, I think when we are rolling around in the world of I can't, I shouldn't, we're really in the state of fear. So let's come back to the body for a minute. Like, what does it feel like when you want to kind of expand out, right? Like you have a dream, you have an idea. If you just look at my body language, there's this kind of expanded movement. But when you run into I can't, you stop. You stop breathing, you stop expanding. Now, I know that we can't go in and say, okay, for you right now, tell me what you're afraid of. The truth is when we are talking about these deep fear patterns, these patterns that are running in our subconscious, we can't bring them up to mind. I mean, yeah, we may say, I'm afraid of spiders, or I'm afraid of black. Here's a great story. I'll hold that for a minute. These are all things that are just our little personal stop signs that started as children and perpetuate through adulthood. So if we can't kind of call up what we are afraid of, like, yeah, I'm going to look at it, I'm going to process it, how do we access it? Some people do this through therapy. I personally think a powerful way to do that is through the embodied creative processes. Because when we start to move or paint or really just follow our body's lead, and we drop an intention is like, what is that fear pattern that is holding me back? That drops into the body, to the mind, to your cells, to your unconsciousness. And then just allowing your body to lead the way through feelings and sensations will actually start to surface up this thing that you're afraid of. Now, as it surfaces up, you may not have a conscious story about it. Stories are definitely about the consciousness, but what you're doing is actually moving that stuck pattern in your body, and it begins to process through your system. So let's do a little. So what I like to do is just share a little story about how this is poignant. A few years back, I was leading an in-person event. Da-da! That can tell you how long ago it was, right? And, normally in this case, there were paint boards all around the wall, all around the room, and people are standing up painting. And the invitation was, honestly, I can't remember what the invitation was at this point, but, people can grab colors or pencils or start drawing. And there was, and my role is to just watch where there's flow or where there's not flow, right? I'm watching the energy. And so in this case, this woman is standing in front of her paper, and there's all kinds of little line drawings around, and she's got this tiny little paintbrush, and she's just standing in front of the paper, barely breathing, barely moving. And I'm watching, and I give her a little bit of space just to be with it for a minute. Because if we can really follow the lead of our body by following these feelings and sensations, we can move ourselves through this. And sometimes we need a little assistance. So I walked up to her and I was like, okay, well, what's going on? She's like, I want to put black on here. I'm like, okay, well, it's kids paint, it's paper, you got a little brush, go for it. She's like, I'm terrified of black. I was like, okay. So what if, instead of getting into the psychology of it, it's like what I offered her was, okay, so if you think about putting black on the paper, where do you feel that in your body? And she touched somewhere on her upper sternum, on her chest. And I was like, okay, what does that feel like? If you could describe that as a shape, what would that feel like? And I think she said a square. It's like, okay, Is the square big or is it tiny? And she said it was tiny. Like, okay, what color is it? And she's like, well, it's definitely black. I'm like, okay. So the body is sending her a message, right? To touch into this thing that is limiting her from being her brightest best self. This thing is showing up is a tiny black square. So the invitation to her was, just try this out. Put a tiny black square on the paper and see how you feel, and then ask your body for the next step. And I said, obviously you can call me if you need me. And then I walk away and I come back about 10 minutes later, and the entire paper is full of black. Big brush, big paint all over. And she is alive and moving. So how does this translate into her life? So let's back this up and talk about this as an energy experience, right? If you touch into, with the invitation of your body's lead, certainly not your mind, but your body's lead, and you bring from the unconsciousness onto paper, whether that's by words, movement, or in this case, painting, you're bringing what is hiding deep inside, lurking deep inside, out into consciousness. Now, it's still in the language of color, shape, and form, so it's not making sense, which is great, right? So then she's putting it out there. And what that does energetically is just moves that little roadblock of pattern. There may or may not be a story associated with it, but the fact is that she was in a fear-based pattern. She wasn't moving, she was really still, she was contracting. And just by putting a little bit of black paint on her paper, she gave herself permission to look at, to honor, to kind of just be with whatever this lurking little demon, if you will, that was in her. And it allowed her to kind of go, oh, wow, this is just paint and paper, or this is just a movement. I am going to let it really show up in my life. And so how does that translate from this embodied experience into life, right? In energy medicine, in acupuncture theory, actually, if there is a block, whether it's a physical block or an emotional block, or in this case, an energetic block, right? The energetic block that we are calling fear, that creates a roadblock in your pathways, in your meridians, in many aspects of your energy field. And when that starts moving, there is just a little bit more flow. There's a little bit more expansion in your life. So when you face your fear, it's not about like ripping the Band-Aid off. It's about saying, oh, hey, there you are. What does that feel like if I move it? What does that feel like if I doodle it? What does that feel like if I paint it? These are the ways that we get into these patterns, into the patterns that are holding us back from living as our truest, authentic expression. And as those patterns clear, you get a sense of more freedom. You get a sense of taking that step through the precipice of change, through that fear, energetically first, and then it'll show up in life. So I invite you this week, as we're kind of in the fear, or in this kind of in-between time, if you will, to get quiet and to ask your body, your mind, your spirit, what is it? What is a fear pattern that I would like to clear? A little fear pattern. Take a moment and do breath, belly, feet, which you can hear in other recordings. Get out of your head and into your body. Drop that intention in and take about 5 minutes and move or draw or doodle, or if you can, get some crayons or paint. And allow your body to express that feeling and sensation that's associated with fear. If you would like to do this in a community, if you would like to be supported in your transformation of being your brightest best self, join us in Creative Alchemy. It is a monthly community where we touch on topics like this, and as a group, we talk, we draw, we paint, we move, we explore the landscape of our soul so we can live as our brightest best self. So until next week, I invite you to honor fear, to be present with it, to say, hey, how are you? And see what your body, mind, and spirit have to share with you. Okay, until next week. Oh, and don't forget, if this resonates with you, if you would like to share this with another person because you think, oh, so-and-so should know this, please go ahead and like, subscribe, and share. Because the more that we live as our authentic selves, the more light we can bring out in a world that sometimes seems much darker than it should be. Bye-bye.